I got the live stream message. That means something's working. Okay, all set? Okay, my name is Rick Leaf. I'm the chairperson of the Master Plan Implementation Committee. This open meeting of the Master Plan Implementation Committee is being conducted remotely pursuant to Chapter 2 of the Acts of 2023, an act relative to extending certain COVID-19 measures adopted during the state of emergency, signed into law on March 29th, 2023. This meeting will be conducted via remote participation. No in-person attendance by members of the public will be permitted. All members of the Master Plan Implementation Committee are allowed and encouraged to participate remotely. This act allows the Master Plan Implementation Committee to meet entirely remotely so long as reasonable public access is afforded so that the public can follow along with the deliberations of the meeting. The public is encouraged to follow along using the posted agenda unless the chair notes otherwise. Members of the public who wish to view the live stream of this meeting may do so by going to Northborough Remote Meetings on YouTube via the link listed on the agenda. Ensuring public access does not ensure public participation unless such participation is required by law. This meeting will not feature public comment. And I will take the attendance here. Julianne Hirsch.
Here.
We know Amy is not here. Millie Milton.
Here.
We know Ashley is not here. Tracy Camarano.
Here.
We know Adrian is not here. Bill Peterson, for people's information, is not going to be representing the Financial Planning Committee anymore, and Lori's going to work to find another representative from that committee. Gene Kennedy.
Here.
Gene Cahill, I think, is not here, right? Rick Leaf here. John Campbell, not here. Dario DeMar.
Here.
And from the staff, we have Lori Connors.
Here.
No one else from the staff, right, Lori?
Nope.
Okay. The first item on the agenda tonight is to sort of do a debrief on the public meeting that we had last Thursday night. I know we had good participation from members of the committee at the meeting last Thursday night, so we want to get people's feedback and impressions of what happened there. I think Lori distributed notes that Melissa Breen from Weston and Sampson took at the meeting, and Ashley also took some notes, though a lot of the things that they had on their list were corresponded to each other. We had a pre-meeting on Monday. We typically have a meeting on Mondays before this meeting just to decide what the agenda is going to look like. We're talking about some of the things that seemed to come up, one of which was a number of comments around, people's desire to have sort of a quaint historic look to the village, and the graphics that were put up were kind of boxy looking, and it wasn't the point of the graphics to show any particular building style, just to show the kind of there were going to be buildings. But Jonathan and Melissa talked about the fact they could produce some examples of different kind of building types that could be presented to the public at the next meeting, and even included in the report as samples of building designs that we would favor. And I know, Melissa, you talked about coming up with some of those. Do you have anything of that to show tonight?
Yeah, so we put together just some quick images to share tonight, and just to get your feedback on this, if this is the direction that you'd like to see in the next presentation and in the report. So I don't know if you want me to go through that now, or you want to finish going through the agenda first.
Yeah, well, let's start, because this is one of the things that came up. So let's start with this one first, and then we get done with this one. We'll just open the floor up to other comments and questions and impressions of other members of the committee. But this was one that was fairly consistent. So let's start with this one.
Okay, sure. So let me just share my screen. So we just came up with a couple precedent imagery. This is similar to what we were doing for the first public meeting, the boards that we had put up on the side. So just the idea is just to show people, like, these are some ideas of what the different types of buildings could look like. We're not necessarily saying this is exactly what they're gonna look like, but it's really just to show that we're not proposing boxes as you see in the graphics we presented. So these are just 4 different types of images showing what we mean when we say townhouse. So in the scenario 3, south of Route 20, we had those large purple, blue boxes. And what we're really showing is something that looks like this, which is townhouse, which is just multiple houses kind of next to each other. And they could either have, you know, 1 unit on either side, or they could just be, you know, single units across. So they would have, like, each would have their own entryway, access from the sidewalk, potentially like a small little front yard or backyard space. So these are some of the ideas we were thinking for the townhouse. This next set, which is loading, okay, so this would be more of the mixed use apartment style. So something that would be 3 to 4 stories tall, which would have a first floor that would be some sort of commercial, or it could be retail, it could be restaurant, cafe. So this first floor has more of a pedestrian scale, so bigger glass windows, things that when you're walking by, you know, you feel engaged with. And then the upper stories would have apartments, and they could have a variety of different looks to them and different features. And we were just looking at things that were brick because that feels like New Englandy, or it kind of references some of the old, like in Hudson, they have a lot of brick buildings that they're already working with. So kind of shows that sort of feel. These next ones, these would be more of a full apartment building. So this would be something that we would propose in the scenario 2, which was in the Harvey property. So this would be completely built apartments, no commercial, no retail or anything, with parking below. So these are just one style looking at brick. And then we have a few more that are a little bit maybe more traditional looking, with podium style parking. So that's the parking that's like you drive in on the first floor, and then there's 3 floors of housing above. And these are just some examples from some of the local, like I think some of these are in Newton. So these are buildings that are being built not too far away. So that's all we put together in terms of imagery and slides for now. We just wanted to get your take on if this is the right direction, if this is what you're looking for. And if it is, we can kind of like elaborate on the different qualities of each of these, and that could be something that we propose and put into the report. And Russ is also here from RTG, so please jump in if you have anything to add about this.
Yeah, Russ, do you have any comments to make before we let the committee start to comment on this? Hello, Russ.
He is here. He looks muted. So
I'm sorry. These are pretty representative, these that we're looking at now. 3 stories over podium, so parking below. Think of that as maybe something close to along the Assabet River. You know, some of these others are very contemporary looking. It may not be your cup of tea, but like Melissa said, they come in all shapes and sizes, and you can be fairly prescriptive about what you'd like to see. I wouldn't be too prescriptive, but the sort of quality of buildings and the, you know, design elements, so those are things that you can be explicit about and let people respond.
All right, I'd be interested in just committee members' comments about what they see here, or their own ideas about, you know, when we heard the word, you know, quaint come up a number of times, what that sort of connoted to you, and you also feel that we should be going for, in quotes, quaint or something other than that. So anybody who's willing to raise their hand, go ahead. Let's get some input from.
Yeah, this is Dario. I think the first thing, which I tried to point out at the meeting, Quaint Village was never a directive until that meeting. So that was kind of interesting, not that we can't turn and move in that direction, but I think it was important. And we should point out before we present from now on that these ideas and concepts that Weston and Sampson are coming up with are all derived from our interviews of the people from Northborough. So it wasn't, if we're wrong, we didn't hit what they asked for, but I think we hit everything they asked for. But that was kind of an interesting thing at that meeting. And I just wanted to make sure everybody knew that we didn't just go off and do what we wanted as the master plan committee with Weston Sampson. We spent a lot of time gathering a lot of data. We put it all down and said, here's what you asked for. Here's what it looks like. Not that we can't change, but that quaint village was not the mantra that we saw when they put all little dots on everything. And I know Weston Sampson, counted them all up and said, okay, there's 20 of these, 8 of those, 7 of these, and we're going to emphasize the ones that the people emphasize, which is really listening, which I think was important. So that's more of a kind of a logistics on how we handle this. If we want to turn to Quaint Village, I think that's fine. The second thing is, with all the masonry we're putting up, masonry is very contextual to Hudson, but not really to Northborough. We don't have a lot of those mill buildings in our downtown where Hudson did. So I thought tying into that in Hudson is terrific. We're kind of very eclectic downtown with us. And our buildings aren't all, we have one little teeny piece of masonry where the pizza place is, but we're a lot of colonial and Gothic and whatever you want to call, the White Cliffs. But that's a little bit not as contextual to Northborough. It's certainly contextual to almost all of New England because we had a ton of brick in the late 1800s with all the mill buildings. We do have mill buildings in Northborough, but they don't happen to be downtown. The closest one we have is down there at the confluence of the Assabet and Coldbrook. So, I think that's at least worth noting. And what I'm looking at here seems to be pretty typical of what I do see in downtowns. In both cases, one with retail and a nice human scale. And I think the word she used was perfect. The first floor is engaging. And I think that's really important. But not as much in the living only case, which we would have along the Assabet. Then it's really more just people. And I think the more we break it down to a human scale, the better it is, because it seems like that's what our people want. So anyway, I think it's important that they know that this came from them, because a lot of people don't want stuff down their throat, and we weren't. We asked, this is what you asked for, here's what it looks like. And I think that's important because I felt like we were being attacked a little bit for doing what we wanted as opposed to listening. And I think it's important they know we listened.
Yeah, I think the only comment I make about that, Dario, was I think in the first public meeting, the stickers people used were more types of things they wanted to see and not so much what they were going to look like when they were built. I think the first time people got some sort of an idea of talking about what things would look like was at the second meeting. So we got a lot of input about the types of things they'd like to see and where they'd like to see them. But I don't think the stickers gave people a good idea of what the physical buildings would look like that house these kinds of things that they wanted as much as this did here. So I think it was a combination of just getting this other kind of input, but I'd be interested in other people's comments.
Dario, I think you did a wonderful job of summarizing that and pulling that together at the meeting. My husband had not been connected to any of these meetings, and he came and he commented about the way you pulled that all together.
Mhm.
And then we had a discussion in our house about what is quaint. Some people could view quaint as Berlin, that does not have really anything but a church and a center little market and no gas stations, and that to them is really quaint, and that's not what we're aiming for either. So I think defining what that is for us, I'd like to see, we've heard this over and over again, a uniformity in whatever we decide, that it ties into maybe one or two buildings, whether it's the old library, whether it's, another building in town, and that we have uniformity from beginning to end and what that look is from signage to building construction. And if it is a little more modern with brick, we figure out how to blend that with what's already existing. And if it's something slightly different and a little more colonial, that's fine too. I think either could look good, but I think it needs to be uniform and no wires in the streets. So it looks pretty.
All right, good. Other comments?
So how do we get to that element of having uniformity? Does that go through design guidelines, and is that much further down the road that we don't worry about that right now, but we don't want buildings going up now that don't fit it? So how do we get there without having any guidelines in place right now for that?
I do think, as somebody who meets with people at the pre-application phase before they've really spent a lot of money on architecture and engineering, I think that it is important to have cues. So when I think of quaint, I think of something that is more along the lines of historic. So kind of like a blending of the historic architecture with the modern architecture. And I think that that could be articulated in our design guidelines. So we already have design guidelines, so we could do a special section that's devoted to this town center.
Yeah.
And really call out with photographs what we're talking about. So I agree with Tracy. There are a couple of really important buildings in the town center that I think could be used as kind of inspiration for architects when they're designing new buildings. So they don't necessarily have to look historic, but they should blend with like 4 West Main Street. So I think that that's probably the most important building as far as architecture is concerned. I mean, I've only been here a year, but that's the building that everybody talks about all the time.
Right.
And the library, as was mentioned. So one thing that I would like to see, Melissa, is I think that all of the examples you have here are very modern. So I would like to see some examples that people could kind of comment on which ones they like better. So if they like the modern, that's great. So then we'll know that that's the direction that people want to go in. But like the more traditional, and of course, I've seen many, many examples of new buildings that have historic attributes to them, so that they look more classic. And I think there are a number of examples along Main Street and West Main Street. So if you could include maybe a page like that, or at least a couple of examples like that, I think that would be helpful. Personally, on the area 2, the scenario 2 example for the Harvey property, I really liked those mill examples. And the reason why I like those mill examples is because the Harvey property has an industrial past, and it's adjacent to 56 Hudson Street, which is an old mill building. So I personally think that that would be really cool for the Harvey property, but I don't know how other people think.
I think the mill building there is awesome because it is contextual. And I also think if you go on East Main Street, heading eastbound, there's a lot of great buildings on that side of the road, the old library. There's a lot of beautiful, beautiful buildings. If we're heading into town from where I'm sitting right now at the Tavern, on the left-hand side of the road, there's a good half a dozen terrific buildings on the left. The old library, there's awesome buildings there. And that's part of our downtown and culture as well, including 4 West Main. And I think, Melissa used a very sophisticated word, but I think it's appropriate, New Englandy. But I mean, I think that's what a lot of people were looking for with respect to their definition of quaint was New Englandy. And I will say that I ran flat dead center into this at a design review committee meeting last week, when I'm looking at a new ice cream stand across the street from us at the old Texas barbecue. And everybody started to comment, well, it was very contemporary. And, someone said, well, you're an architect. What do you think? I thought we were trying to make, Northborough more, and I think they use the word New Englandy, which is kind of a cool word, but everybody gets it. And I was set back on trying to be honest with my answer, because I actually thought the building looked nice. It looked cute. But it has nothing to do with any type of contextualism or New Englandy in Northborough. And that's a thing that the DRC has to very quickly come to terms with, because I did think we were trying to be more contextual, and there's no context for a white building made out of Drive It with a big orange monumental sign with their graphics on it, even though it's kind of cool and cute, but it's not Northborough. It's a McDonald's, it's a Burger King with a new big, I think the sign it's just a big wall on the building. It sticks up higher. It's cool, but it may be all wrong if we have this direction for the master plan. And to me, that and it's a nice designed building, but it may not be appropriate for us. That was a really tough one for me, because someone said, what do you think? I said, I like the building, but I don't know if everybody wants it. So that's a big decision we all have to make. And it was a hard one for me, because, if we're going to make it New England, it has nothing to do with New England, but it's cool, it's cute, it's nice. I thought it was well thought out, but you can have regs like that. And one example is Freeport, Maine. You can't even tell the McDonald's is a McDonald's. Everything has to be contextual there. They have their little arch. It's very subtle, but the sign restrictions keep it from being a big arch. Yet McDonald's is happy as could be to be there, and they complied with all the codes. So I'm not saying that's what we should do, but I'm saying we should do something, and whatever it is, everybody should be on board following it.
I think Gene, you said you had a comment. Go ahead.
Yeah, once we identified these scenarios as specific revitalization parcels, the first question that came to my mind was, what's the revitalization plan for all those other properties in downtown that are excluded from these 4 scenarios? I'm not sure what the answer to that is, but I think it's something we need to be able to answer, because a lot of people are liable to ask it. To that end, and to go back to what we've been just talking about, for example, with the Harvey scenario, if that was an area that was enlarged to include the mill buildings and the industrial buildings on Hudson Street, one, it would give us the contextualization that Dario was talking about. 2, it would provide more opportunities for development along the lines of what we're trying to achieve, because the more you isolate revitalization parcels and exclude other parcels, you're eliminating opportunities that may in the future be what we want, which is more building, more people downtown to revitalize it. My other point is these images from Weston and Sampson, to me, don't really do the job. I can see the white-haired guy who said 350 units. Wow, that's a lot for downtown. And when he sees this, I'm sure he would reiterate his statement. I think we need something that has more of a New England feel to it. Secondly, while the density is going to be needed in some areas, We should also include something that's a lower density, that's a more residential scale in terms of new construction and townhouses. The scenario on South Street, which is really replacing a series of, 100-year-old, 2.5-story buildings, shouldn't look like this. They should look like 2.5-story buildings with, with some good design elements to them. So those are some of my initial reactions to these.
All right. Millie, how about you?
Do we actually have a defined perimeter for downtown that we're working with? Or is it within what's in our code, our zoning, downtown business, downtown residential?
Well, I think for the purpose of this study we're working with right now, Gene talked about maybe expanding a little bit, but we're talking about these 4 scenario areas, the 3 scenario areas that Weston Sampson has presented. I think that right now is kind of the scope of the downtown revitalization we're talking about.
Okay. So they have different zoning elements based on if they're downtown business or downtown residential or where they are. So would we have to come up with different types of zoning to an overlay or something like that to make some of these things feasible?
I
sure we
foresee,
would.
so I actually have been today, I spent some time looking at the downtown neighborhood and the downtown business district. So all of the scenarios are within these 2 areas.
Okay.
So the downtown neighborhood district is the one that contains the Harvey property. So the character is different than the downtown business district, which includes, Blake Street, Pierce Street, South Street, Gale Street, of course, Route 20. So I think that it's not necessarily a bad thing to change, to maintain the districts that we currently have. I think there's a lot of great things to work with within those districts. I don't think the zoning is bad. I just think that there needs to be tweaks.
Yeah.
So there are certain uses that are currently prohibited that we probably want to allow. And then, certainly with the mixed use and the multifamily, the Harvey property and also the 56 Hudson and the property that they own across the street, which is currently a parking lot. And they have a 13-acre parcel that goes up a hill.
Mm-hmm.
Those are locations that I'm particularly interested in looking at for the MBTA multifamily bylaw. And Millie, you're on the planning board, so I'm going to give you the news now. We were told that we cannot include the Avalon property within the MBTA zoning. So we need to find 23 more acres to include with the MBTA zoning.
Wow.
And if we include these parcels, we're there. We have our 23 acres. So the Harvey property is 10 acres, 56 Hudson and the property across the street, that's more than 13 acres. So right there, we have more than 23 acres. So that would, fill the bill. And then we could, tweak that zoning. So whether we do it as a by right zoning district or whether we do it as an overlay, we can decide that later.
Okay, because I was thinking.
Why aren't those properties included in that, the Harvey scenario?
I'm sorry?
So why aren't those industrial properties on Hudson Street included in the Harvey scenario? If that's what our plan is for that area, wouldn't we want to include that as a revitalization parcel?
Yeah, the information about Avalon just came last week. So that was new information that came after these scenarios were already developed. So I don't know if it's something that can be tweaked and added, Melissa. So 56 Hudson is currently a historic mill building. And then it has newer industrial portions. So it's currently used for industrial purposes and office space. And then the 13-acre property across the street is currently parking, and that's it. Forest.
It would seem to me, Melissa, that extending scenario 2 to include those abutting, if you will, properties would not be a conceptually difficult thing to do. It's not going to change any of the design thought that's going into scenario 2 already. It just includes more acreage. It could be a possibility for inclusion in the revitalization.
The only question I have on that is 56 is currently being renovated to be manufacturing, which doesn't fit in with anything we're trying to do. I mean, it's being built as we speak. If we get told to tear it down, or we're going to wait 50 years to put commercial in?
You
That's
know,
a tough one.
that is what I was thinking of long range. You
It's
know,
gonna be, we'll all be dead by the time that gets built, because, I mean, if they're building it now, they're not gonna flip it in 2 years they were gonna put manufacturing, they'll be there, 20, 30 years minimum. It's
but I
being
think
done as we speak,
not
it'll be a brand new
necessarily.
building.
Yeah,
The
but
property-
I think Lori's point is well taken, Dario. I mean, this has got a horizon of a lot more than 2 or 3 years. It's just concepts of what could be done over a longer period of time. So I think Gene's point about trying to include that is something to keep an eye on going forward with this whole project. Makes sense, especially if it's going to be useful for eventually satisfying the MBTA communities thing.
Plus also the property owner is interested in being included within the MBTA zoning. So, I can't imagine 56 Hudson is currently under construction, as Dario said. But the 13-acre parcel across the street is not.
Mm-hmm.
And they are interested in having that looked at for multifamily. There are some challenges, there's a steep grade, it's a hillside, so chances are
parking.
you're not going to get a huge amount of density out of there. But there is potential.
I'm wondering if it wouldn't make sense if this can be, fit in the middle to what's left in the contract here. If maybe we didn't do another little walk around with as many committee members as we could in the downtown area, just look at the architecture, look at the buildings, and sort of come up with this consistency that Tracy's talking about. Kind of what would that look like? What would it be leveraged off of? Would it be leveraged off of 4 West Main Street? A lot of the other buildings are more frame construction, some of the older historic houses. The library, is more of a Gothic, stone kind of building in the front. But maybe just to come back and spend a couple of hours in that area, just look at things and talk about it. And then, as Lori suggested, have you guys produce, another graphic that would sort of portray what buildings would look like if they conform to something that we all kind of agreed on was a good consistent look for the downtown, leveraging off of what's already there, as I think Gene mentioned, the buildings on South Street, 2.5-story frame buildings or older buildings there. There may be some reason to say that things that look something like that might be useful. And like I said, on the other side of the library, a lot of the older homes are frame buildings, and yet, 4 West Main is also right in the middle of the downtown. So I'm just wondering if that wouldn't make sense to have a little working session for a couple hours and just look at everything and talk through and maybe come up with a group decision as to kind of what this other view would look like. Is that something you guys, if we want to do that, is something you or Jonathan or somebody or one of your designers could come in and spend a couple hours with us and look at that?
Yeah, I think so. I think that's a good idea too, to kind of look at what's already there in the downtown and kind of base our guidelines off of that. I think that's a good idea. But I'll talk to Jonathan to see what he thinks is too. I don't want to make the last call, but I think that's a good idea.
I think also, you guys, the residential that we're trying to do along the Assabet, there's a lot of cool tricks you can do with residential that, and these are all 4 nice buildings, but it's really not what we're looking for. I'll say just contextually, they're more modern, they're brick, they're very nice architecturally. But we actually got forced to do in Atlanta, we had housing, and the first floor had to have porches and patios. So it kind of popped out a little bit, which really brought down the scale of the building. And then we entered the parking garage from behind. So it was one of those things where it looked very residential on the street. It even, and don't laugh at this, but if you look at Beacon Hill, it's a huge wall of brick buildings, but they have the stairs in the front and it's busted up a little bit in the front with just 10 or 15 feet of green. And then all those buildings are 3 and 4 stories tall. So the massing is identical. The architectural, how you manipulate the architecture and articulate and break it apart with a couple little ins and outs, and really like the upper right-hand corner, that little pop out for that entry, if that's a guy's patio or a porch, all of a sudden the whole building reads as residential. And it brings it down to that scale that I think everybody's trying to accomplish without losing the density.
Yeah. All right, maybe if Lori, you think if you're agreeable to having a little walk around like this, maybe you and Melissa could, or Jonathan could compare calendars and see what'd be a good time for you guys and let the rest of us know. And as many of us as possible, you could join you that day and sort of take a look at things and give some ideas. And then based on that, have Weston and Sampson come up with another view that would sort of fit this kind of conceptual look of the downtown. And I think, as you
Yes,
said,
I'd be
Lori, I
happy
think
to.
showing some of these images we're seeing now, but also showing as another alternative, something else we come up with that's kind of more based off the current downtown plan, showing those to the public at the 3rd meeting and just saying, what do you think about these different looks? Get some feedback about what we think is more contextual, and some of these things that might be a little bit less contextual. So what kind of feedback we get.
Another thing that Jonathan and I talked about leading up to last week's meeting, we just didn't have enough time to sort of flesh it out, but there's a real argument you can make to including the CVS property as part of that scenario 1, where that's the largest property adjacent to the area that we're looking at. It's probably one of the strongest uses there. There's nothing to say that has to be affected at all, but any developer that comes in and is working with you and looks at that area is going to logically look at the biggest property and say that could be an anchor in a different development that's more in keeping with what they're trying to achieve here. So I think we wanted to have a little bit more time to think about that and talk about it, but I just put that out there for something you to think about as well, that scenario may need to include that property as well.
All right, we'll give that some more thought. I think that is in line with what Gene was talking about. I think the more we'd include in the scenarios as future possibilities, I think makes everything hang together better when in the future things get done. So
Yeah, that's a good example of where that could be the case.
Yeah, I recall back in March when we had our first meeting with the downtown mapping that showed the various areas. That area 1 at that time was west of Church Street and north of Route 20. The gas station, the auto repair, the vacant former furniture store. And that was dropped over the last several months. And I'm not sure why, but it's a key corner of downtown. And if we have two non-conforming uses right there. We have a vacant former fire station. I understand that there's talk about some sort of plans for that area. But if we can show that as an area with redevelopment, revitalization potential, it would only support any future development that takes place there. So I guess my question to Weston and Sampson, or maybe Rick and Ashley at a meeting made the decision, but why was that area dropped from the various scenarios?
I can't think of a particular reason why. I can't remember exactly why it was dropped. Tell you the truth, Melissa, does anything ring a bell with you why that area west of the intersection of Church and Main ended up not being included in any of the scenarios?
Yeah, I'm trying to think too. I don't quite remember. I know we had several conversations refining the areas, and I think some of them were based on town-owned properties or areas that the town already had say over, but I don't remember either. I can get back to you all with, I can talk to Jonathan and get back to you all to see if he remembers. I don't know, Lori, if you remember any background either.
You
Oh,
know,
I know
along
that
those lines,
Millie owns a couple of those properties and is planning on redeveloping them. So I'm not sure if that had something to do with it, maybe because there was already that in the motion.
Julianne, I see you've got your hand up.
Well, I just wanted to add my opinion to the proposals here, and I do have to say that I'm in Jean's camp with I mean, you know, we did hear the word quaint a lot, and these look huge and not quite fitting with the downtown. I was also thinking more along, you know, it'd be nice if we had an area of townhomes. Those might be popular with people who are trying to downsize but still want a little front yard. So that was just my comment, and my hand was up a while ago, so I'm sorry, I'm going back. But
No, it's okay.
I think, Melissa, the idea of the townhomes is good, but this architecture is super, super modern. I think it might be a little
Okay.
too shocking for a lot of the people in Northborough. Like, I think that they're looking more for traditional architecture. Correct me if I'm wrong, but that's what I heard at the community meetings. Like, I think they're looking for something that harkens to a more historic look of a townhouse.
Mhm.
So the problem isn't the townhouse. I think the problem is the super modern architecture.
Okay.
Like
And as you-
this is what I see as like Cambridge. Like, I don't see this in Northborough.
I would
think
agree
the-
with that, Laurie.
I think everyone needs to sort of keep in the back of your mind how this will move forward and who will make these changes occur and what costs will be incurred in doing that. I think it's going to make it difficult to do townhomes, maybe not at any location, but it's going to be very difficult to do it as the price of the underlying land goes up. You know, although there's not a lot happening in some of these lots, if the prospects go up, the value of the land's going to go up, and it's going to be very difficult to justify putting a townhome on a very expensive property when the tendency will be to have more density than a townhome development. So I'm not saying you can't get any townhome, but I'm thinking that may be less likely than more likely.
All right, well,
You're-
why don't we we've had a lot of good discussion on this, and so it sounds like the general feeling here is that we want to move something to something a little less contemporary, a little more traditional, and something we're going to show the public at the next meeting. And we also want to do a little work on this, you know, consistency across the existing architecture in the downtown right now, and set up a kind of a working session to take a walk around and look at things and see what might come out of that. And then the output would be another go round of some images like this to also include what comes out of our working session and a review of that prior, to getting back in front of the town to talk about the actual look and feel of this development. Because certainly there was a lot of feedback, about that.
Mm-hmm.
So let's move on to another aspect that got a lot of feedback at the community meeting, which was housing and the amount of housing being proposed. I think one of the things that we probably didn't anticipate as a committee was that we talked about the need for a housing component, residential component in the downtown area. But we never really thought about in each of the scenarios what could be proposed there. And then if you added all that up, what that would add up to. I was saying at the Monday pre-meeting, it's hard to understand exactly how much housing we're actually going to get. I think each scenario had to propose the fact that there could be housing in there. But it's not clear to me, let's say that scenario 2, that somehow something broke with the Harvey property and those owners were willing to sell and a developer was willing to come in and work with the town to do something reasonably like what scenario 2 looks like and create reasonably above the amount of housing that's in scenario 2. And then, 2 or 3 years later, something starts to break, in what they're calling Assabet Mill, that area between Main Street and Assabet Park, that something may start to happen in there. The amount of housing to go in there could be what was proposed, or could be less, or it's so these things will be built out probably in different times under different situations. So it's not exactly clear to me how you sort of pre-anticipate how much housing you're going to actually end up with. So be interested in just, people's feedback to those comments and, what people's impression is as to how we should come back to the community with a more defined plan that addresses some of these concerns about, not saying that, I don't think we can come back and say we can't do housing. I think it's pretty obvious it's going to have to be a residential component. But I think if we come back and say, it still looks like it's going to be 300 something units of housing, I think we're going to get the same pushback again, that somehow that seems to be too much. And frankly, even to me personally, it seems to be more than I would have anticipated we would have built in the downtown. So I'm just kind of struggling with where we go from here on the housing one.
Let me give you a little context of why you ended up with roughly 350 housing units. Half of those units are along the Assabet. And the reason why is mostly because to get sort of investment grade apartments or condominiums, it's oftentimes as a sort of minimum threshold of units that you would want to have. So you can have professional management services on site and maintenance and all the things that make that a nice property and keep it highly maintained over many years. And if you fall below those thresholds, you're less likely to get that. So at least on that property, we wanted to sort of get at that threshold. It could be less for sure, but then you lose a little bit of certainty about what level of effort and investment is going to be put into on-site management of the site. Everything else is sort of a smaller scale. It's when we came up with these scenario building programs, they're all sort of meant to stand alone. If you start to look at them happening in conjunction with one another, I suppose you could sort of knock down that number. But what is that right number? It's really hard to know, because you're right. These things are going to happen at different times in the future. And, it's going to be whatever the market is going to allow to occur at that time. So I just want you to be aware of that.
It seemed to me that scenario 2, the redevelopment of the Harvey property, was the most appropriate place to do some sort of significant housing component to kind of fit in, I think, with kind of the whole kind of residential aspect of what was going to happen. There was going to be a little bit of commercial down on scenario 2, a couple of buildings on the corners, but it was mainly going to be kind of a residential thing, and then kind of like a kind of a park-like environment, if we could make that happen with the trails and the river walk and all of that. It all seemed to fit into more of a somewhat less commercial and more residential kind of area, whereas you'd think that Blake Street and Pierce Street and what would be going on between Assabet Park and Main Street would tend to center a little more on the retail commercial thing, and there probably could still be some, housing above, especially if the developer felt to make it financially viable, there was gonna have to be some residential in there, but not to the same scale as scenario 2. But once again, I'm kind of struggling for how to come back, sort of better define this in the report and better explain it at the final community meeting as to how this whole housing thing is going to build itself out, when it's probably to a certain extent going to be at the desire of the developers who come in to do the property over time, kind of thing. But I'm interested in other feedback about this housing thing and how people think we ought to proceed going forward with housing.
Well, one thought I had was it was good that Weston and Sampson had the slide that gave us the general totals, even at a very conceptual stage, 350, X number of square feet of retail, number of parkers. That's the type of information that people can start to look at and react to, and we got reaction. One way to present that is to provide it within the context of downtown. So with 350 units, is that 20% of the housing that's in the downtown area, 30%, 40%? Do the same for retail, and provide it within the context of the downtown, not as each isolated parcel.
Yeah.
I think it's also important to note that if we do include that land within the MBTA zoning, which is a mandate, we don't have a choice. So the choice is the location, not where the number of units are provided. But that is 15 units per acre. So that's the density that is required by law. Now, I don't necessarily anticipate that it will be built to that density. It could be built to less than that density. But if you take a 23-acre parcel and you times that by 15 units per acre, you're talking about 345 units right there. So that 13-acre parcel that goes up the hill, chances are it's not going to be able to support 15 units per acre. So I anticipate it'll be something less than that. But it isn't very hard when you're doing first floor retail and then you're doing 2 stories of apartments above the retail. You don't need a very large building to get a lot of units. So I think the number is scary, but during a build scenario, I don't think it will be as overwhelming as people think that it'll be.
Other comments, feedback?
I mean, I think it's also important to remind people that are afraid of that number that this is over a significant amount of time. It's not going to be in 5 years, probably not even in 10. And I know one thing that was mentioned was the traffic impact or the concern about that. But I also think it was good because Lori pointed out that hopefully these people will have things to walk to in downtown so that they won't be driving their cars as often as we do now. But, I think there's a time element that should be certainly brought into this to remind people of that.
Yeah, it's a good point. Other comments? I think this is going to be the thing we're just going to have to spend some time and think our way through before we go back to the town one more time. And then obviously when we go before the Board of Selectmen with the final report, it'll also be important for us to kind of present exactly how this would play out over a long period of time, what the impact in the town would really be, and what would happen in what order. There was, some good comments made at the meeting about getting some of the infrastructure work done, sooner, and some of the redevelopment and building would come in later on. I think there's no doubt that, that thing can be phased in that manner, and there's ways to get grants and funding to do some of that work. Just before, we just move on to other general comments about kind of where we are. I think one thing we need to sort of get to before we conclude this session tonight is some ideas, some next steps as to what do we need to do before we get ready to have another community meeting, about when do we want to set that up for, and also start to talk about finalizing the report. What is it going to look like? What is going to be in there as far as sections and things we want to talk about? But is there anything else about the housing component? Anybody else, any comments or feedback people have before we just get just general comments about what we've seen so far and what came out of that community meeting, and any other ideas or suggestions? But before we just sort of move off of housing, anything else on housing?
I think people just wanted a more human scale. That's what I sensed more than anything, Rick. I don't think it's a little bit the quantity, but what we're looking at there doesn't really exist a lot in Northborough. It's everywhere in Marlborough now, everywhere, especially down, Ames, and, there's huge complexes. But I think for such a gorgeous area along that river, people, I think, just wanted a more human scale. And that can be accomplished with everything that Melissa showed us, just by changing the architecture a little bit. It's not at all too expensive or out of our grasp.
Julianne, any comments on the housing part?
I have a question. When you've done these projects before with this type of build out, do you guys do impact studies, or is it recommended that we get traffic impact studies to predict what will be coming
Sure.
throughout, or along the lines, or along the way?
Yeah, so I think you could do those sort of studies now, just to sort of frame what the likely impacts would be, but you certainly would want to require a developer to demonstrate that they're trying to mitigate the impacts, and just what those are, whether that's a traffic impact or a school impact or other things.
Yeah. All right, I guess before we just close off this item, is there any other things that people heard at the community meeting? Any other comments or things you've seen after seeing the presentation that we ought to be questioning or talking about or changing? Or do you think that basically the way that the scenarios have been presented, seem to look reasonable at this point?
I guess I think
There's
one
some
thing that did
potential
come
on
up.
the final community presentation there was a little bit of that in the last presentation, but just kind of identify the low hanging fruit. So kind of the easy things that we can do to just kind of propel us forward.
Mhm.
So these are the things that can be done in the next year or two, with a little bit of money. So, maybe a slide talking about sign and facade improvements. So maybe even just showing an example of a building that today isn't all that attractive, like maybe the Riverside Mart, and maybe superimposing an awning on that to show what it would look like. And then, I know the last time you showed the planters and the lighting, but just some other things like, art that just can be added to some key locations, that might be helpful to kind of get people excited.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea, with actually using actual buildings or places that are existing now in Northborough, like you're saying, like superimposing an awning or planters, or just so people can kind of see, oh yeah, I know that spot and that looks better with
Yeah.
those spaces.
And
Yeah, I
even,
think
you
that's
know,
what
like the utility box in front of the 4 West Main Street. So I know that I've seen them, you know, artists will paint wraps. And so like an example of a utility box that has, you know, a nice painting on it, you know, something like that. That would be simple, easy for us to do.
Lori, Cultural Council has been talking about that for a while. We just haven't, you know, kind of brought it into some kind of plan, but back to Rick's question about what else we heard. I think we all heard that there are people in town who have been through this a couple of times and expressed frustration that there's, you know, there's often a lot of great plans, a lot of talk, and yet in 10 or 20 years, you're starting with this all over again. Therefore, I think to Lori's point, where we start with the low-hanging fruit and start to show some progress as quickly as we can, it will be very important.
I think it would also be wise to look at the option of starting an economic development discussion for a committee or something, because that is something I think that is going to be critical to success.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think the final report is going to have a section or a couple of pages recommending how the town should proceed in improving its economic development capacity, whether that's recommending addition to staff or committee or both or something. I think Lori could have some good input to Weston and Sampson about, from her perspective, what might be necessary there. But I think that I agree with you. That's going to be critical to make this happen. And to your point, Julianne, that will also help take this from being a plan into a reality. If there's either some group of people or some person whose job it is to take this plan and start to do something with it, much like our committee is taking the master plan and trying to make something out of the master plan happen. The next step is, you know, do a downtown strategy and then start to implement it. And if it's going to take an economic development capacity to do it, figure out how to do that. Yeah. This isn't low-hanging fruit, but it would make a great improvement would be to bury the utilities. So now this is something that towns can.
That's
Yes,
definitely not
yes.
low-hanging fruit.
I
That's
know it's not low-
millions of dollars.
Right,
but
but
it's
the
critical.
point is, does
Yeah.
this report and study just ignore this? Does it say something about it? It just seems like, you know, it's like, it's one of the gorillas in the room kind of thing. There's no doubt it would make a huge difference to it. Even if we didn't do a whole lot of redevelopment, if we could do some of the real low-hanging fruit as far as beautification and improvement, burying the utilities would go a long way to improving the whole area in the downtown. It'll probably open up a little real estate to do some things where the poles are. So
It's expensive, Rick, but it's
know.
no doubt wanted by, I would say, every single person in the community. There's no one that doesn't want it until it comes time to pay the bill.
You know what? I think there is potential, like with the Harvey property. Right now, it's a blank slate, pretty much. So to mandate that all the utilities be underground for any sort of development would not be something that would be unreasonable to ask for. And then I would also think that, you know, Blake Street, you're not talking about a lot of space. And if the desire is to redo the sidewalks anyway, you're digging up the roadway, the sidewalks, then that would be the time to bury those utilities. Now, Route 20, that might be a bridge too far. You know, they just did the sidewalks 10 years ago. So that would be a Mass DOT project. And I don't see them digging up their sidewalks and then using taxpayer money to redo those sidewalks before their time. the appropriate time to bury the utilities was 10 years ago when they were redoing Route 20. So I think that ship has passed until the next time those sidewalks are ready to be redone.
And I think maybe, Melissa, doesn't have to be a lot. Maybe the report should at least have a couple of paragraphs that say something like what Lori just said. That it was considered, it could make a big visual improvement, but the time to have done it would have been, you know, X numbers of years ago when the other things happened, and time to consider it again is the next time that kind of work would need to be done to roll that in there. But I think we need to at least say we've talked about it and we decided to not recommend doing it, and this is the reason why, you know, kind of thing. And the same thing, be prepared that if this comes up at a community meeting or at the selectmen's meeting, or as we start to propose warrant articles at town meetings someday to do things, and you know, how come you're not burying the goddamn utilities? You know, that would make a big difference that we've at least given it some thought and addressed it in at least a small way in the report.
But I think
Yeah.
that, you know, it still would be worthwhile to talk about those side streets and that Harvey property, because right now we changed the zoning. So when you go through site plan review, you have to bury those utilities. So I would expect any sort of development on the Harvey property would absolutely have buried utilities.
I think also, Lori, when we talked about, when we do that, we also put in sidewalks, because that was another thing. Anything we do now should have a sidewalk in front of it, even if nothing can connect to it yet. And you dug in, which I thought was really cool, when they tried to bang out of it on the ice cream shop. And they got, and you know, to your credit, God bless you, you said, no, we're putting sidewalks in, you know, because
Yes.
that's when you do it. When someone's doing something new, you put the sidewalks in, and eventually they'll connect. Or at least when we decide to connect them, it cost us half as much because any new development had them in place and ready to go. So that to me, people want to walk around, they want to connect the trails, they want the sidewalks, and they want the utilities down. That's pretty much everybody. And like I said, you flexed your muscles and stood behind it and got beat up a little bit, but thank you for standing behind it.
Thank you. And thank you for supporting me in that.
It just makes sense. It's the right thing to do. That's all it is. And I think it's hard for anybody to argue with that. That's the bottom line on that. You know, when you're doing new development, bury utilities, put the sidewalks in, do your treescape. Then when we decide to do it as a town, it's a lot easier because half of it's done. My 2 cents.
All right. Before we talk about next steps from here to move to completing this project, getting a third community meeting out of the way, getting that feedback built into the report, completing the report, and basically ending this particular phase of the project, and then talking about actually doing what's in the report next. But so we're sitting here now on the 18th of May. How necessary is it to try and get all of this wrapped up before vacations start happening in July, or is that not particularly necessary? It would seem to me that a couple of to-dos that came out of the meeting tonight was to rethink kind of the visuals, what these buildings could look like, and to set up a kind of a little walk around to talk about what we currently have in the downtown and how that could be factored in, and trying to make things a little more traditional and New Englandy looking on some of the graphics we've seen tonight. I'm not really sensing in terms of scenarios themselves, except for the fact that we talked about maybe the expansion of scenario 2 to include this mill building and parking lot on Hudson Street, and at least considering, well, I guess, you know, Russ brought up the possibility of folding CVS into scenario 1, and does that also go across Church Street and fold in the property across the street over on the other side? I'm not sure we want to go that far, but beyond that, the general concept of what's being included here, I'm not hearing a lot of, didn't really hear a lot of pushback. People seem to like at the community meeting what they saw conceptually about what was being proposed. So it seems like there's not a lot of work that needs to be done to revise the scenarios themselves, as much as kind of the look and feel aspect of it. And, you know, coming up with a way to sort of better describe the timing of how the housing would be built. So if that's the case, it would seem like the big to-do now is to get this look and feel aspect kind of finalized, and then sort of represent the scenarios at community meeting number 3 with some pictures of what these buildings could actually look like, different alternatives, and get some feedback about how do people want the downtown to look as far as the style and, you know, size of the buildings and things like that.
Yeah, I think that's correct, Rick. I think people were generally excited about the concepts, the theming. We purposely didn't give them much detail on the building and the structures because this sort of conversation and their feedback was necessary. So I think rather than sort of messing too much with the building program, we need to come back and show them contextually what things look like or could look like, and get their feedback on that. I think it was very positive, generally speaking.
So if we worked on that over the next couple of weeks, and also, you know, Melissa, you know, sort of develop a draft of what this economic development recommendation, you know, might look like. And maybe we talked about including something in there, an appropriate place about the utilities, you know, the fact that, you know, if something gets developed in scenario 2, that should be done with underground utilities, that maybe Blake Street on scenario 1 could include, you know, doing something with utilities, but that along Main Street itself on Route 20, you know, words to the effect that the ship on that passed already and would have to wait until another major reconstruction of Route 20 happened to consider doing the utilities there. So maybe getting some words about that into the report.
Rick, how about if we come back to you, the committee, with an outline of what the report's contents will be, so you can take a look at it and react.
That would be good. Yeah.
So we don't spend a lot of time writing up things that maybe aren't central to what we're trying to do.
Yeah, that would be a good idea.
Okay.
So our next meeting, regularly scheduled meeting, would be the 3rd Thursday in June. So I guess my question is, what could we or should we accomplish between now and then? Should we try and get the 3rd community meeting done before then so we can react to it in the 3rd Thursday, or is there not enough time to get this kind of all pulled together and do a 3rd community meeting? And if that's the case, would we defer a meeting again in June and schedule our next MPIC meeting after the next community meeting and focus on, you know, seeing an outline of the report and getting these sort of look and feel designs done? I don't know, Lori, kind of what's your feeling about the timing of what happens over the next month to 2 months here?
I just have to tell you, I'm on vacation for 2 weeks. So the last week of June and the first week of July.
Okay,
So I won't be available at that time.
okay, we definitely need to be available for that. So I guess the question is, do we try and get this as final as possibly for you on vacation? Or do we try and get things ready to go as much as we can between now and the last week in June, and then when you come back, schedule the community meeting for, you know, sometime in the middle of July, and then try and finalize all of this, you know, after that, sometime July into beginning of August?
I think that's a question for Melissa and Russ. Like, how much more time do you need?
Well, I mean, I think sooner. Go ahead, Melissa.
No, I guess I'm just trying to figure out the difference between what we need for the next meeting and the report, because I think those are 2 separate things. Like, I think the next meeting we could probably do in a month or when Lori gets back, if it's just like a matter of, you know, updating some graphics, coming up with some new ideas for the architecture. I think that's definitely doable. I guess the report, maybe Russ can speak to you more, but I would want to check in with Jonathan about like the timeline for that and maybe have a better understanding of what we want that to look like.
Yeah, I think, I mean, the report takes time. So the sooner we have your feedback and directives on that, the better. We can start working at some of the conversation we're having doesn't really affect that. But deciding what the contents are going to be does affect it. So the outline could come to you fairly quickly. Getting your feedback and direction, that would be helpful. And then when that meeting's held, I guess is, an important consideration. I think Jonathan needs to sort of think about that and what's involved in pulling together that presentation. So I won't speak on his behalf for that.
So Lori, when does your vacation start? June 26th?
Yeah, it starts on the 26th, although I do have a commitment on the 22nd that I can't miss.
Our
So-
next MPIC meeting will be the 15th. If we go for the third Thursday of the month, which is what we've been doing.
Mhm.
So
I
could
wonder
we,
if that would be a good time to have the third community meeting. And the reason why I say that is I'm concerned once you get into July, that's when people start going on vacation big time because school is out. If the community meeting is held on June 15th, then school is probably still in session. They're finishing up the last couple of days. So chances are people will still be around.
well, another approach could be if we could make some headway on this look and feel stuff we've been talking about, try and get a walk around in the downtown and sort of come up with an idea of what this consistent look would be, and have Melissa and Jonathan, do some revisions or some other pictures or graphics of kind of some other alternatives of what buildings could look like. We could try and have an MPIC meeting prior to the 15th of June or sometime in the week of the 12th of June to just look over that and make sure we all think that, looks pretty good. We could, in advance of that, they could send us, the stuff over email. And then, schedule the community meeting for like the 15th of June and get that out of the way. I think the key thing is to, just as a committee, feel comfortable that what this next set of images is going to look like is something that we all agree we want to present to the town. And it could be not just one thing that we're recommending, but, a series of things. It starts with some things like we saw tonight, some things a little bit more traditional and New Englandly, as Dario says, and then something that's built over this little walk around we've done that is our vision of kind of what something to be a very consistent look of what we kind of have in the downtown. So there'd be some sort of 2 or 3 different looks and feels. And the point of the community meeting would be to say, this is the last thing we really need community input on is what are these different scenarios of these different looks and feels, which one do people like the best?
I mean,
Well,
I
we
think
talked
that's
a
a
little
good
bit
idea,
more.
Rick, that we take a look at it before we present it.
Yeah.
But it is definitely a question of time. Whether that's going to be something they can get to us and then we can look at it before the 15th, or, do we make the community meeting the 22nd?
Yeah, I definitely cannot be there on the
Oh, you're
22nd.
okay. Yeah.
But we could do something the week of the night. It wouldn't have to be Thursday, the 22nd. We could do something the week of the 19th.
Mm.
So we
Yeah,
could have our,
because-
we could have our committee meeting on the 15th and then schedule the community meeting, Lori, for a time you're available the week of the 19th of June.
Does anyone know when school's out? Is it the 21st or 22nd in town? Does anyone know?
I don't know.
No, okay.
We talked about more than just images tonight. We talked about modifying the boundaries or introducing new scenarios. So I think as a committee, we should get some sort of a response from Weston and Sampson on what they think on that, and clearly have any of those revised boundaries reflected at the next community meeting. Certainly don't want to have a community meeting and then after the fact enlarge or change boundaries or increase density or show additional units.
Yeah, I agree. I don't know, Melissa,
Yeah,
from
so I'm-
from your perspective, Melissa, I mean, what do you think is a reasonable time frame to be kind of working down this
I
path?
think a month. I think we'll need a month to do this work. So
Okay.
I think we should be, if we can, the week of the 15th with you all, and then do the community meeting between the 19th and the 21st, Monday, Tuesday, or Wednesday. I think that's reasonable from our end.
You want to check, Laura, with the library to see if it's available one of those 3 nights,
Okay,
19, 20, or 21?
I can't do the 20th, that's planning board.
Okay, so either
That means I
19,
can't either.
Right,
okay,
so
So
it'd be
either-
either the 19th or the 21st.
yeah, so let's tentatively
And-
shoot to do the next community meeting then. Let's tentatively shoot to review these things we talked about tonight, an expanding of the scenario boundaries, these new looks and feels, and then Lori, if you and Melissa can get together and pick a time when at least, you know, you guys can get together in the center of town and walk around and let us, the rest of us, know when that's going to be, and as many of us that can join you will. So we can talk a little bit about this, trying to tie the look and feel into what we currently have, what the playoff is. Is it for West Main Street? Is it some of these historic frame buildings? Is it the library? Is it a combination of those things? I don't know.
Yeah, I think pulling in the historic elements into from the downtown are critical components of having it have a consistent look.
I mean, I think Say La Vie looks very nice.
There you go.
We can have the whole Say La Vie stretch down there.
You know, if we could, because we're here.
Yeah.
Next week, Thursdays tend to be really good days for me. I
Yeah.
don't have a lot of meetings.
Yeah.
So would Thursday afternoon of next week work for people?
For the
Um,
walking?
It would work for me.
For walking through the town area?
Yeah, so that would be May 25th.
If we could do it like from anytime from 1:30 on.
I don't
1:30
think I'll be
works.
able. I don't think Jonathan or I will be able to make that. We both have various project meetings. I'll be in Manchester by the sea, so nowhere
Okay.
close by.
How about the
for another
17th
project.
or even the morning of the 19th?
What do you mean, tomorrow?
So
What week are you in?
I can't do tomorrow. I've got site visits.
no. Do you mean the 26th?
24th or the 26th?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, the 26th. Yeah, I'm looking at the wrong week.
I think I could do the morning of the 26th.
26th or the 25th?
26th. Friday. No, Thursday morning I can't do, but the Friday the 26th.
Okay, I'm available then.
All right, let's do it.
Should we
Friday
say 10
morning?
a.m.?
What did you say?
Millie,
time?
would you say
10 Friday morning?
10 a.m.?
Sure.
That works for people?
Yeah,
All
obviously,
right.
we're not gonna
Yeah.
get the whole committee there, but as many people as we can get.
Can you repeat that day? I'm sorry, I had to step away a minute.
It's going to be Friday, May 26th at 10 a.m.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. All right, so we'll do that, and the plan will be I think, Melissa, as you guys get stuff completed, or you have drafts of things you want us to look at between now and the 15th of June, just, send them to Lori over to us, and we can comment on things as you're working on it, so that we have a pretty good idea by the 15th of what we're gonna see, kind of thing. And then
Okay.
we'll try and tie that all up on the 15th, and then shoot to do either Monday or Wednesday the next week, try and do community meeting number 3. And then based on what comes out of there, we'll have a better feel as to what else we have to do. And once again, also, if you're at a point where you can at least do an outline of what the report is going to look like without filling in all the details, and that's something else we can, kick around on the 15th, that we could do that also. But
One thing I am particularly interested in seeing is an analysis of our parking regulations. So if you could look at our parking regulations and let me know if they are out of whack for the types of uses that are appropriate in the downtown. So personal service, office, retail, multifamily. That would be super, super helpful.
The other question that I did have in some of those buildings is, were they to scale to our downtown or to the zoning already in existence for height? They were, okay.
Yeah, yeah, so we stuck with the height limits that you already have. So that's 45 feet.
Okay,
So-
that's what I thought. They looked taller, but that's just good to know that's the scale, what it looks like.
Yeah, I think it's just because they're like boxes, so they don't have any of the nuances of normal buildings. So I think they just looked a little bit more like monolithic than they really are.
Trees or
Yeah.
on the 26th, we just want to meet in the town hall parking lot, and then just start to walk up from the town hall up Main Street towards the center of town. Do it that way.
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah, I think there's some really nice architecture in the historic buildings that, those buildings we'd want to save, I would imagine, and they're important to the character.
Yeah,
I think Norm Corbin would have a heart attack if we started knocking down some of those historic buildings.
Yes, you
Mhm.
sure would.
But
it
to
would
the
be
extent that we don't, I mean, they could be a good guide. or
Yeah,
model
that's what I'm
for what we
saying.
want other buildings to look like that we put up.
it would be delightful to see some of those really unique features carried through in maybe even just aesthetic format, but still tying it in.
Okay. Okay, well, I think, we're getting to the point here where we're getting to the point we need to sort of wrap this thing up. We've done a lot of work over the last few months. We made a lot of good decisions and struggled with a lot of things, but we're getting close here. And I think it's getting important now that we're really focused on finishing this and wrapping up, getting the final report. And then
Mm,
making the presentation of the Board of Selectmen, or the Select Board, excuse me, now the Select Board, as to what we're doing here. And then the next thing is going to be, now what do we do?
mhm.
Interesting I think that's something else, probably maybe Lori, that, you and Jonathan and Melissa can talk about in building into the report there, from your perspective, some of this low hanging fruit are, projected really good next steps you got to think about doing, and to the extent where some of the funding, that may come from. So the report would not only give a picture of what we think the town could look like longer term, but would sort of say at the end, and now, we recommend these are the things we start to get to, and this is how we get them done. And then just between us committee members, we might want to go back to the master plan and see what else there is in there that we might want to bring forward to the town and make some headway on. This has been kind of an all-encompassing activity for us for quite a while, and I'm sure we'll still be involved in working with Lori to help manage whatever we do with building out the downtown, but it'd be interesting to go back to the master plan and see what other things in there are important that we think we ought to be moving on also.
Mhm.
All right, is anything else, Lori, from your perspective that we need Russ and Melissa for tonight?
I think we're good.
All right, well, Melissa, Russ, thank you very much for participating tonight. We'll look forward to keep working on this, and we'll get moving on this next phase of the look and feel stuff.
All right, folks. Have a
Great.
good night.
All right.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Okay, lot of good discussion tonight on that. Next item on the agenda is discuss potential requests for ARPA funding for downtown sign and facade program. You want to give us an update on that, Lori?
Sure. So I emailed to everybody a guidance document on how to establish a sign and facade program. So this was developed by DHCD as part of the Rapid Recovery Program Toolkit. And I think that it had a lot of helpful information. And then I've done some additional research. There are a number of our surrounding communities that already have sign and facade programs, including the town of Shrewsbury and the town of Melrose, which isn't really in a budding town, but it's not too far. The town of Marlborough and the town of Westboro. So there's some great examples of programs that have already been in the works. So what do you folks think about what you've read? And is this something that you want to go forward with?
Yeah, my impression is,
Yeah.
I think it fits into it. It's sort of like a sub feature of what we've been talking about with the whole downtown plan. I'm not sure we call it exactly low hanging fruit, but it's something that could be done, with the existing situation we have that could improve things. So it would seem to make sense to me.
The
think
one
it's
issue
a-
that I'm particularly concerned about with the ARPA
Absolute
funding
necessity.
is the money has to be spent by a particular deadline. So if we were interested in going forward, I think we should make this request sooner rather than later.
I don't know, Julianne, from your perspective, I mean, is this something you feel that the select board is, I know they've been holding back and trying to figure out the best way to use ARPA funding. Do you think this is something that would get a good reaction at the select board? Oh,
No, I think that I definitely think that we should ask for a substantial amount of money because this is something that fits with the whole intent of the ARPA funding. And while I improvement program, CMRPC has done a little bit of work with that in various communities, and I'm not sure how many credits we have, but they might be an agency to bring in also when we start talking about actually the details of a facade improvement program. So yes, definitely we should ask for the ARPA funding.
okay, that's helpful. Other comments or reactions? Anybody feel we should not do this? Not hearing any negativity towards this. So what would the next step be, Lori? Would you sort of, based off of this information, sort of draft up some sort of a request that would it come from our committee? Would it come from you with support from our committee? How would that work?
Yeah, I mean, what I could do is have it be from both of us.
Okay.
So, I mean, this is something that I think would be a great idea. I could even, flesh out some of the aspects of it, just so that the Board of Selectmen could have some context about how it could work, with the understanding that the details would be worked out at a future date should the Board of Selectmen decide to award the money for this particular purpose. So then, I could come to you folks, should they say yes, and give you some particular options, and then we could work through the details together. Should you want to be a voice in the process. So it's definitely something that I think, as I mentioned, should be done sooner versus later.
So just out of curiosity, Lori, you said there's a timeline for this funding to run out. Is that, or to be used by, is that correct?
Yeah, so there is a horizon that all ARPA money has to be spent by. And Julianne, you probably know this off the top of your head. I don't have my ARPA file right now. I think it might be December 2024, but I'm not positive. Does that sound right to you?
I thought it was that you had to designate the money by 2024, but it has to be used and completed by 26.
Okay, well, that's
Yeah.
good. Because
Okay.
I'd be nervous about spending $200,000 in a year through
Yeah.
a sign and facade program, because of course there's an education component and getting the word out.
Yeah.
So if we have till 2026, then that is a more realistic time frame, I think.
But it still is around the corner.
Yeah.
It is, especially
I-
because this is, like usually a reimbursement. So they have to do the work and then they submit the bills and we reimburse them for the money that they spent. So that's often the way these programs work. So we'd have to leave some time for them to hire contractors and get that done.
And I do have to double check on that. That's it's been a while since we discussed it, but whatever it is, I think we should ask quickly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So this is ARPA funding that has already been designated for the town of Northborough, and it's really up to the town to decide, or the board to decide whether this is a good use of it.
Mhm.
Okay, so it's not coming, it's not asking for something else from the state.
No.
Okay,
No, we
Yeah,
have
and
the
the
money
great
in the
thing
bank.
is it's supposed to
Okay.
be for businesses, for business relief from COVID. So I think that this would be a really good fit.
have you known other towns that have been successful in using it that way?
Yes.
Okay. Okay.
So Lori, the question is though, if it's for facade improvement, do we have to establish some guidelines quickly on how
Mhm.
Yes.
what we expect in that?
Yeah, so these other communities that I mentioned already have guidelines, and the sign and facade toolkit that I emailed to you folks have a number of things that they suggest. Oh, John Campbell's coming. So yeah, it could be used for a whole host of things, but usually it's exterior work. So it could be used for, if they have a patio or windows or, any sort of exterior facade improvements or handicap accessibility. So like a ramp or, any sort of code issues that they might have. It could be used for awnings or signage or lighting. So there are a whole bunch of options that they specify. Usually code issues have to be dealt with first. And then the other items, they could even use it for plantings or planters. So there are a whole host of options, but yeah, should the Board of Selectmen decide to award us that money, then we can work out the details later.
Okay.
So is this something, I'm not sure how much we can, to the extent that our committee's involved, if we can do this outside of public meetings, is this something that for us to continue to be involved and, work with you on this, there'd have to be another discussion about this at the June 15th MPIC meeting? Or do you need to get stuff done before the 15th of June?
I would want to see if I got an answer from the Board of Selectmen. I'd be interested in submitting it within the next week or two. I don't know if the Boards of Selectmen would turn around with an answer that quickly. So I wouldn't probably want to discuss it until the Board of Selectmen had decided that they wanted to fund it. I wouldn't want to waste your time on designing a program that isn't going to happen should they decide not to.
Mhm.
Okay. Well, I guess as a committee tonight, I guess we've indicated our concurrence. You should go ahead and take the next step.
Okay, great.
Okay. The next item on the agenda is election of officers, which is done yearly. I'm just wondering, I mentioned to Lori if we should wait until the June meeting and see if we have, more committee members in attendance to do these elections kind of thing. I'm not sure where people are leaning on this. I have no problem in continuing if people want me to continue as chair. If other people want to be nominated, we can do that also. I didn't talk to Ashley prior to the meeting about what her thought was about if she wanted to continue as the vice chair or whatever. So my recommendation would be to not do these tonight and put this on the agenda for the June meeting, and hopefully we'll have a larger number of committee members at the meeting. But I don't know, what do people feel about that?
I second that.
Yeah,
Okay,
Yeah,
Okay.
I'm okay. Yep.
I'm good with that.
Since
okay.
I have a question though about the members. So Fran was appointed for a year. Hers is over. Are we looking to fill that position or?
Right now, we have 2 openings. So we have the Finance Committee member opening, Finance, what is it?
Financial
Advisory,
planning.
I'm calling
Financial
it the
Planning
wrong
Committee.
thing, I know. And then we have the resident seat open. And the Council of Aging, of course, that individual never comes. So I would like to prioritize getting the representation from those 2 committees. But I mean, yeah, I suppose we have 3 openings.
Well, 2 we know of.
But financial planning appoints theirs, right?
Correct.
And Council on Aging appoints their representative. And
Right.
so the resident at large should be advertised and we should interview for that?
Yes.
Okay.
So Lori is going to follow up with the Financial Planning Committee to see who they want to nominate. And I'm just going to get a hold of Adrian and just see what her situation is. And if it turns out that she feels she doesn't want to continue, then we can work with the Council on Aging to have them appoint someone else. But I'll talk to Adrian first. Okay, so that brings us to minutes of March 16th. They were distributed in advance of the meeting. Are there any changes to the March 16th minutes?
I don't have any.
I did not have any.
Okay. Can I get a motion to approve the March 16th minutes as presented?
So
I
moved.
move we approve.
Is there a second for
I second it.
that? Okay, let me get my little cheat sheet here again. We have to take a formal vote on this. Julianne,
I have to abstain.
you have to abstain. Hopefully somebody will vote on this. Okay.
Aye.
Millie,
Aye.
good. Tracy, Jean,
aye,
Rick, Dario,
Yes.
minutes are approved. Is there any other business to come before the committee tonight? Hearing none, can I have a motion to adjourn the meeting?
I make a motion to adjourn the meeting.
Is there a second for that?
I second it.
Okay. Julianne,
Aye.
Millie,
Aye.
Tracy,
Aye.
Jean,
aye.
Dario,
Aye.
and I say aye. So meeting's adjourned. Good job tonight. I think we covered a lot of ground and we're moving in the right direction. So we'll see you all on the 15th of June or I guess on the 26th of May, those that want to walk around and talk about the look and feel of the presentation. Thanks a lot, guys.
You
Thank you.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Fred.
Bye-bye.
Yeah.